So I've been on this new wave lately, and if you listen to recent interviews of mine, then you probably have heard me say this. But I've been removing the phrase "bad financial decisions" from my vocabulary because I don't believe that people make bad financial decisions intentionally. I think that people make what they feel like is the best decision for them in that moment. And of course, in hindsight, we could look at any financial decision that we make and say, that was that wasn't so great, right? Or I would do something differently. That said, I don't think that any decision that I've made around money has been a financial mistake.
Welcome, everybody, back to another exciting show of the About That Water podcast, where we help the sandwich generation build strong financial habits so that they can talk about money, enjoy their money, and spend their money with confidence. So today, I have one of the awesome guests that I haven't talked to you in such a long time. Actually, I talk to him like regularly. But I'm just glad to actually have him on the show since 2022 to really catch up for everybody else to see what he's been going through. The ultimate famous guy, Kim Sabree. How you doing, Rahkim?
I'm good. I appreciate the glowing welcome.
Because I think last we chatted, you were in the process of like writing like your second book at this time. So now it's finally out, which is Overcoming Financial Traumas.
Yes,
How's
sir.
that been?
It's been good. This is my third full length book. And this is my first traditionally published book. So a little bit of a different landscape in terms of the expectations, the support, what marketing looks like, what deadlines look like, the whole thing. But it was definitely a labor of love. I had to crank out, the 50,000 words in I think 6 months they gave me.
Jeez.
Um,
Wow.
but yes, we're done. We're done writing. The book is actually out next month. So we're in the printing phase. Everything's been finalized. The endorsements have come through. I'm really excited about this book. I think anybody who has read any of my previous books will notice significant growth in the writing process and the way that I talk about these concepts. And anybody who has listened to me talk about financial trauma will also see significant growth as I've had to kind of dig deep into research and interdisciplinary fields to come to the conclusions and really expounding my perspective on financial trauma in this book. So very, very excited about the work.
Yeah, I'm excited to get a copy. I'm glad that this one doesn't have any skin tones this time.
Well, I mean, we don't know, right? It might be a different printer this time, so we'll see.
I know, right? At every time. And maybe I might luck out, you know what I'm saying? It might be like a shiny Pokemon, you know what I'm saying? It might come through.
Exactly.
So, um, before we even dive into all of this, what is your true definition of financial trauma?
Yeah, I like this question. So financial trauma is any instance observed or experienced that has a negative impact on the way someone views, interacts with, or believes about money.
Yeah, because I wanted to start off with that mostly because it kind of sets the tone for this conversation of for those of other people that never heard of it, they kind of get an inkling about it, but rather hear it from the source itself. You know what I'm saying? You might as well. Your name is synonymous with it at this point.
That was the goal. That was the goal.
Yeah, because right now at the time of this recording, we going through a furlough, and according to CNBC, they saying about 750,000 federal employees are actually furloughed. So, and it's actually impacting 2.2 million federal workforce that are out there. So, with that being said, you wrote an article talking about quiet cracking. Can you talk about that a little bit more for the audience?
Yeah. That article was of the recent articles that I've written. That article was the most viewed. I forget where it sits right now, but definitely in the tens of thousands of views. And I think the reason for that was because it was resonant with a lot of the people who were reading it. So really quickly, anybody that doesn't know my story, in 2021, I quit my job, or I fired my boss, as I had phrased it. And a lot of the environmental factors that existed within the workplace and ultimately impacted my mental health, my physical health, just the trajectory of what my career path would look like in the years to come had to do with what I now not define, but what I now call workplace financial trauma. And so workplace financial trauma is, it kind of speaks to the behavior or the reaction that individuals have to having to go out and engage in what I also refer to as economic warfare, right? So you're going out and you have to make money. And so you have to deal with certain things, certain conditions, certain standards and culture and what have you, in order for you to make money, in order for you to survive. And so the phrase quiet cracking was a random phrase, I guess somebody made up, but it spoke to an issue that has existed for a very long time. And I think with the big contrast that, not that I was trying to draw, but that I noticed when I talked about firing my boss back in 2021 and this quiet cracking phenomenon in 2025 is that not everybody has the privilege by way of resources to remove themselves from the harmful situation that exists within the workplace. I was fortunate to be able to do that, but some people have to stay in an environment that is toxic, that is causing them harm physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, what have you, in order for them to secure that paycheck. And so, quiet cracking, I don't have the exact definition as it was defined, but loosely paraphrased, speaks to kind of like these feelings of desperation that individuals have to navigate in basically continuing to show up at a job that is causing them harm because they're worried about what income looks like or their ability to find another job. And so in today's job market, which looks very different than it did in 2021, people can't just leave and engage in the great resignation like I did, right? In 2021, people were leaving their jobs, they were going to other jobs. It was definitely an employee's market. Now employers can kind of turn up the heat and in some ways be very abusive to the employees that they have because their employees don't really have much of a choice.
Yeah. Like, what tools should somebody have in their playbook to kind of help, um, as you could say, deal with the pain or deal with that particular issue when they going through this?
I think having the vocabulary or the language to describe what is going on is a huge first step, right? Even if you feel powerless in your ability to make a decision after realizing that, this is the lay of the land, I think that so often we end up, when I say we, I'm talking about people in general, end up in these cycles of questioning ourselves around, whether or not we're bugging, right? Or am I the crazy one? And, am I experiencing this by myself? Am I overreacting, right? And so external variables and relationship partners, whether they be employers, whether they be coworkers, friends, partners, what have you, can then play on that and be like, oh, that whole concept of gaslighting, right? Making you feel like you're crazy. And so when people have the language to describe what it is that they're going through and recognize that they're not going through it by themselves, that other people are experiencing something very similar, it takes the focus off of, what's wrong with me and really places the focus on where it needs to be and what is the factors or the variables that are contributing to this experience occurring in many different people. And so for the workplace specifically, I think giving people the vocabulary, workplace financial trauma, describing what it is, what it looks like, what it feels like, is a big first step to helping people realize, okay, it's not just me. Now, what are the things that are within my span of control to do something about? And what are the things that are outside of my span of control to do something about? And how can I focus on the things that I can control? And so then that goes into your conversations around traditional budgeting, investing. How do you prepare yourself for the exit if you decide you want to become an entrepreneur? What skill sets can you take in order of that you can then monetize? Or if you want to make a career pivot, what skill sets can you take in order to execute on this pivot effectively? I
Mm,
think relationship a little bit different, right? Because relationship is a commitment, right? It's a commitment on both sides, and you choose that person every single day, and you hope that that person chooses you as well. When we add in the variable of finances, and you said something that was, I think, in terms of society, we kind of brush over very quickly, and we don't spend a lot of time kind of assessing the why in this. But finances or issues around finances are one of the top, if not the top, causes for separation in relationships. And so when there is a mixed match, right, in terms of expectations, in terms of values, in terms of um what is norms, what are our money stories, right? And I don't want to be super cliche and sprinkle these financial therapy terms in here, but your money story from childhood and the narratives that you carry into adulthood, what it is that you tell yourself about money, what it is that you believe about money's role in your life, is going to, in some instances, maybe many instances, clash with the money narrative and the money stories of your partner. And so, if you guys are not clear on what is the foundation that you're operating from, not what is the articulated foundation, right? We can say we're on the same page in terms of wanting to save, in terms of wanting to invest, in terms of wanting to buy a house, have children, all the things that have financial implications. But if we're not understanding what are the unconscious drivers of our behaviors with money and our beliefs about money and the role of money, not only in our lives individually, but in our relationship collectively, then there's going to be a clash. And I think that, financial therapy is one of several options that people can pursue in an effort to solve that, right? Because again, financial therapy provides vocabulary, provides language to pinpoint this is what a money story is, right? This is what your narrative looks like. Is it something that you are in alignment with? Is it something that your partner is in alignment with? How do we move forward and get as close to alignment as possible? Because sometimes it may not be possible, right, for you to be in 100% accord. And as you grow in your relationship, the variables that surface or that will influence your money story, your money narrative, how you want to move forward may also change, right? So I do this exercise specifically around financial trauma when I'm working with groups, particularly with groups of helping professionals, so individuals who work with other individuals, where I identify the 6 sources of financial trauma. And then I do a lifespan mapping of where you are right now backwards. Where did you experience any of these 6 sources of financial trauma? And maybe you experienced one of the 6 sources of financial trauma in childhood, and then you experienced that same source again in your early or late adulthood. But in childhood, you weren't in a position to do what you are or what you may be in a position to do in response to that source of financial trauma as an adult. And so, even though it's the same source, your reaction to that source can look different in a different stage in your life. And I think, just kind of protracting this outwardly into all matters of money, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be related to financial trauma. Um, how you react or how you respond to financial stimuli, whether that contributes to anxiety, whether that contributes to stress, whether that contributes to ambition or what have you, can look different in your 20s than it does in your 40s or your 60s or your 80s, right? Because your needs are going to look different. And so there's this constant need to calibrate and recalibrate with yourself and with your partner that I think can act as at the very least a retardant to that random, okay, I'm done, like I can't handle this anymore. But in the best case scenario, can act as kind of an indicator that okay, we need to get back in sync and figure out, how do we get as close to alignment as possible.
Yeah. So that was a lot, dude. Not to unpack, but one of the things that caught me off guard was if you can go into detail a little bit about the 6 sources of financial trauma, because a lot of us we might experience it but don't even know where the sources come from. And I want the person that's listening to this right now to kind of say like, okay, this is something that I can take action on, or at least do my homework on while I'm going through the day, whether or not if I'm furloughed or not, or if I do have to go to work, or if I'm going about life.
Yeah. Um, I don't want to call it an oversimplification, but in the process of writing Overcoming Financial Trauma, I wanted to talk about financial trauma through several different lenses at the same time. Because when we hear the word financial trauma, or when some people hear the word financial trauma, it just feels very heavy. And it's also often associated with singularly financial hardship or poverty. So the idea that I wanted to surface is that financial trauma is agnostic to your income, your age, your race, like all of these variables that we often just kind of categorize in this little box and say, okay, if you meet this criteria, if you check off these checks on the box, then you are experiencing financial trauma. So some people in this space will acknowledge the six sources. Some people will say, oh, well, you're just taking one thing and you're spreading it out, whatever. For the sake of the person that's listening, the six sources of financial trauma are genetic or generational, right? So I talk about what are the stories and ideas about money that we pass down culturally from generation to generation, and also what is the epigenetic impact, right? And so that is biophysical, the expression of genes that change based off of experiencing trauma and stress in a previous generation or in the present generation that goes through onto the next generations, right? And so, funny enough, I seen a post not too long ago that, and I didn't dig into it because I was just like, oh, this just validates my point. But I seen a post on LinkedIn that talked about how um stress, well, I don't know if it was stress specifically, but basically how certain variables can impact the sperm that a man has,
Mm.
and can then have further impact on the child, resulting from that sperm, based off of change in the expression of DNA, which speaks to epigenetic studies. So when we talk about epigenetics, and this is an emerging field, it speaks to the way that genes are expressed, not necessarily changed, right? And so you might have a greater sensitivity to stress hormones like cortisol. You might have a greater or a decreased like window resilience or tolerance for certain things, based off of environmental factors, that can contribute to mental health, that can contribute to what is the biochemical interactions that take place in your body. So, dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, all of those things, cortisol. And so when I talk about generational and genetic financial trauma, I'm not just talking about grandma doesn't trust banks and she talks to dad about not trusting banks, and then dad talks to me about not trusting banks, and these are attitudes that can be changed with information. I'm talking about these biological markers that are also traveling through generations based off of financial stress and or financial abuse that have occurred through external variables. So that's number one. Two is vicarious or observational. So that's the second source of financial trauma. Is probably one of the ones that flies under the radar. So I talk often about how our financial socialization will have us very early identify people in groups of the haves or the have-nots, and based off of that group of the have and the have nots, we see how individuals who are a part of the have not groups are treated, and many times are treated poorly. And specifically speaking about a population of homeless individuals, we see how homelessness is criminalized, increasingly being criminalized. We see how people who have less are often thought of or talked about as if they deserve less, as if they are useless eaters, right? As if they are not intelligent, as if they are whatever, right? You fill in the blank, and we start learning this as early as childhood, right? When we go into elementary school, when we go into the parks, and we look at what kid has the Skechers and or the Payless shoes versus, right? So
Yeah.
like these are things that are part of our financial socialization that we carry into adulthood, And so, to me, it's not a surprise that individuals are living above their means to try and show off for their friends. It's not, I think so often it has been categorized as a mixed match in discipline and values, and not so much in terms of what it is that we pick up through observation around how people who don't have money are treated. So that vicarious financial trauma can have a profound impact on how we engage with money because of what we see or observe about people who don't have money or who have less money. Even if we are a part of that same group, we don't want to identify with that group. So generational, genetic, vicarious, or observational financial hardship or poverty is a third one. That's the one that is most often associated with financial trauma. So individuals who are, actively going through it. I don't think that I need to spend a lot of time on that, right? Like that is your flagship. When people talk about financial trauma, that's your flagship example.
Yep.
Four is workplace, or employment. And so I talked about that briefly. Like the workplace financial trauma is the abuse, I'll use that word, that you experience in the workplace. And it can be kind of a overt or covert abuse, right? Like you may have to engage in a practice of code switching in order to get the raise, get the promotion. You may have to adopt a completely new identity in order for you to make money. You may have to endure working in an environment that is toxic, that is harmful to your health in the various ways that that manifests physically, mentally, spiritually, in order for you to collect a paycheck. And you may work in an environment where there's a wage gap, right? Where white men are paid, I forget what the dollar amount is, in excess of black women, right? Or and everything in between, where you may not be picked for the promotion over, the guy that looks like the guy who's in charge. And then I talk a little bit about what shaped corporate culture and the institution of slavery as one of those influencing factors. So, workplace and employment trauma, I do draw ties to the institution of slavery in this country, um, and how pervasive that continues to be in today's world. Number five is institutional or systemic financial trauma. So I talk about the government's role in financial trauma. I talk about the institution of financial services role in financial trauma. So that's where your classic redlining, where your predatory lending, that's where I mean, we're seeing a lot of this in today's world with, this current administration um, doing crazy things, right? Rolling back policies and
Yep.
even what has contributed to this government shutdown. It's a strong example of institutional and systemic financial trauma, right? The government is really abusing its power. And then the last one is family, society, and religious financial trauma, right? So these are the expectations that your family might have of you, based off of a certain income level, based off of a certain age level, right? Like they may expect, oh, by this time you should have the house, by this time you should have the wife, and you should have the kids, by this, oh, you're making this money, you should be giving back to the family. And I lump that in the same category of societal norms, and culture that says this is what you should be doing, this is where you should be, and also religious. And so I talk a little bit about tithing and the expectation to tithe, and how some of the religious values can influence the individual in terms of how they engage with money. Um, not in the sense that I am downplaying the role of religion or trying to say that anybody's religion is wrong or that they shouldn't practice or anything like that, but from the perspective of encouraging them to be more introspective around how their values tied to the institution of religion can influence their behaviors when it comes to money, particularly if it is in direct opposition of wealth building practices, right? Like if you're tithing when you should be paying your light bill, right? Like that's a problem. And so I talk a little bit about how religion has been weaponized, particularly against Black people, during the time of slavery, actually. I pull from Powernomics, so Dr. Claude Anderson talks a little bit about this. I pull from post-traumatic slave syndrome, so Dr. Joy DeGroy talks about this. I pull from so many sources throughout the book, but I think that I cover the six. So that's generational, genetic,
Yep.
vicarious, observational, poverty, financial instability, workplace and employment, institutional, systemic, and family, societal, and religious.
Got 'em. So, because one of the things that stuck out the most to me out of those 6 was pretty much the workplace one. And the reason why I'm bringing up both the relationship side of the house versus just bringing in the income is because all of this is relationship based. And it's like how we actually view ourselves in society, going back to checking a box. So it's like, this is actually really cool to kind of understand like where those traumas are actually coming from. But there was something that you mentioned on Tiffany Grant's episode, and I thought it was pretty interesting. You guys, obviously, her show is a lot shorter, so didn't really get a chance to dive into it. Um, but you talked about really separating yourself from the system, about spending money in society nowadays, and trying to choose to be part of the system or not. Why is it important that we actually recognize that that is a problem? And then, secondly, to actually remove ourselves or try to separate ourselves from that.
Yeah, great question. And just to provide a little bit more context around that conversation. So, when Tiffany and I were talking, we got into the science of advertising, and how basically like advertising is weaponizing our nervous system against us, right? So our nervous system is what protects us, and I'm oversimplifying this in a very elementary way, but to get to the point, our nervous system is what protects us. It's what lets us know that something is wrong, and so I talk about the evolutionary responses of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and how those nervous system responses that let us know, whether or not an environment or a situation is dangerous or safe, shows up in our money. But we're not socialized to view money as a threat. So many times, because of our financial socialization, we are ignoring or overriding our body's bells and whistles that says, hey, there's a problem here. I describe it as a smoke alarm or fire alarm, right? When the fire alarm goes off, when you're cooking a steak, right? You can say, hey, I'm not in danger. I'm cooking a steak, and that's why the fire alarm's going off. So it may startle you in the moment, but you're like, oh, let me go and pull the battery out, or let me just turn the fan on, or whatever, right? You're overriding your response to danger. But if you are sleeping and the fire alarm goes off because there's actually a fire, it's letting you know, hey, there's a problem. You need to do something about this. And either you if you have in your capacity to put out the fire, you put out the fire, you call the fire department, and you get out of the house. Our nervous system is the fire alarm or the smoke alarm. And many times when it comes to money, we are ignoring the smoke alarm. So much so that, we can no longer hear the chirp in the background, right? It's when you don't change your battery. I
Yep.
use that analogy in the book. And funny enough, as I was writing the book, my smoke alarm's chirp was going off, and I was like, "Oh, look, I need to change the battery." But I use that as a culturally relevant example because so many of us can relate to it, right? We don't notice the chirping until like we record the TikTok video or whatever, and somebody's like, "Damn, you need to change some batteries." Same thing applies with money. And so Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Freud, the big psychology guy, had trained governments and agencies around advertising science that tie advertisements to emotions, right? So we don't make buying decisions based off of logic. We make buying decisions based off of our emotions. And because we are constantly in a state of dysregulation, and we're looking for ways to regulate our nervous system. You think about the news cycles tied into the mass marketing efforts of advertising through social media, through traditional media. Everywhere you look, there is some kind of signal telling you you need to buy this thing in order to be happier, better, loved, more attractive, slimmer, whatever, right? Everywhere you look, you're being bombarded with messaging that tells you you need to spend money. And because you recognize that you're in a dysregulated state, but you may not understand why you are dysregulated, this messaging is giving you the solution and saying, hey, if you get this thing, you'll feel better, right? And so we're constantly engaged in this culture of consumerism that tells us if we spend the money, we will be or we will feel better. And then we spend the money and then we have to jump back right on the hamster wheel. This is by design. And so in that conversation with Tiffany, I was talking about, first of all, becoming aware of the fact that this is science that is being weaponized against us. A dysregulated person is a profitable one. And so, as long as our media and government can keep us in a dysregulated state, we will continue to spend money and we will continue to engage in this culture of consumerism. But if we can identify that we are dysregulated and then engage in practices that bring us closer to regulation, then we recognize that we don't necessarily need to spend as much as we think that we do. And we can be intentional about how we respond to advertisements, or how we remove ourselves from even being bombarded with the advertisements in the first place. And I believe that it's getting increasingly more difficult to do so because of technology, right? We are constantly attached to our phones, our tablets, now watches, rings, sunglasses, you name it, that have notifications that constantly go off. That's like, hey, 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 look at me, look at me. We know that the social media platforms reward content that keep you on platform, right? So the goal is to keep you looking at your screen longer. And while you are looking at your screen, there is greater opportunity for individuals to place advertisements in front of you. This is all science, right? This is all by design. And so I talk about that very briefly in comparison to our nervous system and our evolutionary responses, because where somebody might engage in a flight response from responsibility, from the stress or the danger of a situation, like paying their credit card bill or paying their rent or whatever. um, I think what is hallmark of the flight response in comparison to the freeze response is that you are constantly looking for ways to stay busy so you don't have to address the issue at hand. Well, what better way to stay busy than to go out and spend money that you don't have, that you should be spending on, right? The responsible thing,
Exactly.
so that you can get the dopamine hit, so that you can feel better in that moment, right? And so this goes into some of the narratives that we hear in the financial education space around people feeling like, oh, I deserve this, right? For retail therapy, or I deserve a treat or whatever. And I think that, it's tricky to talk to people about, because on the one hand, yes, like I agree, you do deserve. But what are you taking away from in the process of pursuing what it is that you deserve? And what are you trying to solve for by spending your money in this way? And certainly I'm not immune to it, right? Like I fall victim to this just like everybody else does. But I think that when we understand what's happening, again, this talks about this idea of exposure, which is the first step in the framework that I introduced in this book, right? When we have language, when we have vocabulary, when we understand kind of what is the rule of the game that we're playing right now, then we can make more informed and more intentional decisions that make financial education, or financial literacy, as it's been popularized, more effective, right? Because the issue is twofold. It's that people need to learn how to navigate these financial systems by way of financial literacy, but also that these financial systems are weaponized against us in such a way that if we don't understand the weaponization piece, then we're going to engage in these financial systems. We can have all the financial literacy in the world, but now that we're being taught how to hold on to more money, we also have the ability to spend.
It's a gimmick, man. Like, when can we get back to just trading rocks? But I have to say, like, one of the things that got me, even like you said, is being on social platforms all the time and getting us to spend money in certain places. But one of the things I've noticed that even my own actions, because I've noticed when I saw your when you started coming back on social, you started showing off that you going back to the gym. And I was like, man, this guy gonna be buff. I gotta hurry up and get ready because I'm not sure he's gonna show up at FinCon. I gotta be ready. So I started hitting my normal 150 push-ups a day just so I can, when we do the grip, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all together. But that's one of the things that I guess that comparison narrative, and I guess we have to understand our own triggers as well on what triggers us to spend money, and also the triggers that cause us to run away from money, going back to the nervous system. So I have a lot to learn, but at least this time it didn't cost me money. I could just sit here and do my own push-ups. I ain't gotta go to the gym. It's like you get your method man going on over there.
Man.
How's that been, by the way? Has it been helpful since you've been writing the book? Everything was done. You able to focus on that?
So jumping into a little more personal, I guess, side of Rakim's life. Last year was probably the most unhealthy year for me in the recent past. I did not go to the gym at all. I was eating at Chick-fil-A like regularly. And if I wasn't eating at Chick-fil-A, then I was eating at Shake Shack because I had just discovered Shake Shack and I was like, these are good.
Nice burgers,
But
man.
the amount of calories in those foods, and fast food in general, but in those particular foods were ridiculous and I wasn't paying attention because I didn't care. The food made me feel good. And, you compound that with drinking alcohol, you compound that with not working out, you compound that with just having a sedentary lifestyle. Not only did I gain weight, but my cholesterol skyrocketed. And so I went and had my annual physical, and my doctor's like, what the hell is going on? And I'm like, I can't explain. And so fortunately though, at the midpoint of last year, so June 1st, I decided I was going to stop drinking altogether, which was tough because I drank socially. So anytime I would go out, I would, grab a beer or grab, some kind of whiskey drink. And I got to a point in my, talking about this idea of masculinity and what it means to be a man. I had gotten to this point in my manliness where I was very proud of being a whiskey drinker. And like, I'm like, yeah, I like this kind of whiskey and I could drink this whiskey neat or I could drink this whiskey on the rocks. And, I don't necessarily need to do the girly drinks, but I could do like margaritas and mojitos and all that other stuff. But, um, the alcohol was contributing to my cholesterol. And I was like, it's a net positive really to not drink it because the recovery, at this age is harder to rebound from, and it's not beneficial to me. So I stopped drinking June 1st. Hit a year this year, June 1st.
Congrats.
Thank you. And it was a lot in the beginning. It was hard, but it was not as hard as I thought it was going to be. Right? It's like, do you really need to drink alcohol? And now so many places have mocktails, and you can supplement with tasty beverages, or maybe not so tasty beverages that imitate drinking alcohol. So, but I don't know what it was. It was like some kind of like psychological barrier because I wanted to go to the gym all year
Mhm.
last year. Like from January 1st on, I kept telling myself, okay, I'm gonna go, but I kept making excuses not to. And from a money perspective, I paid for my gym membership the entire year. I just didn't go. And this year I was like, yeah, I can't do this again. From a health perspective, not even just from a vanity perspective, from a health perspective, like I need to be active. I need to make some changes. So uh started slow. January 1st this year, that week, I went maybe 2 or 3 times and I would just probably walk on a treadmill or whatever. By the time February rolled around, I started lifting again. And with the exception to like maybe a week or two of sickness, I have been in the gym consistently at least 3 times a week from January 1st to present. And like at least being like those are the bad weeks. Most weeks I'm in the gym 5 times or more a week. And it's been great for my mental health. It's been great for helping to regulate my nervous system. It's been great for helping me to stay focused and establishing consistency and discipline. It's been great for socialization, so I don't necessarily go by myself. I go with like a crew. And so during that time period, I could push myself, I could do more because I have the support of other people who are like-minded. And it helps me sleep better, it helps me relax. Like there's so many benefits to working out and to lifting heavy. But I've also, started to in this half of the year, I've really like we're in the last quarter, a focus on how other ways of exercise can also exist and me not feel bad about not lifting heavy, right? So, stretching counts, yoga counts, walking counts, running counts, like all of these things that you can do in addition to or instead of lifting. But lifting is my vice of choice when it comes to working out. So I definitely like love picking up things and putting them down.
Right. So for those of you who listening on the audio, you might have to check out the video feed. Notice he's filling out the whole frame here. Like, you know what I'm saying? Solid dude. But man, Rakim, we coming down to the third segment of the show, which is the features. We talked about health. We talked about the psychological side of the house as well. Mostly dealing with the finance. Where do you see people as they start to educate themselves about their triggers in the financial space when it comes to financial trauma?
This is a good question. I see it as a double-edged sword, if I'm gonna be very honest with you. Financial trauma is trending right now, right? Financial psychology, financial therapy, all of this is trending. So there are people who are jumping on the bandwagon because it sounds cool, it sounds sexy, it's new, it's novel, it's not your, regular financial literacy content. So great for the work that those of us who are committed to growing the field are doing, right? Because we're getting a lot more exposure, we're getting a lot more of an opportunity to talk about these things. Not so great for the people who are like trend jumpers, right? And it's funny, like last night I was just kind of randomly thinking, I'm like, what happened to all the Forex people?
Right.
Where'd they go? And then, and then the turn into the crypto bros and the NFT bros and then the trading bros, and it's just like people jump ship. And that's one thing that I'm very proud of over the last let's call it 5 years or so. I've been singularly focused and dedicated to the work of financial trauma. And of course, like, there is more broad focus on financial therapy and growing, what that field looks like. I sit on the board of Financial Therapy Association, financial counseling, working with the AFCPE, and just kind of growing awareness around these designations and credentials and the education associated with being a part of these organizations. But focusing on financial trauma has done quite a lot for me and my brand in that, like you said earlier, it's synonymous with Rahkim Sabree at this point. But I do see people who will talk about financial trauma from a place of being minimally informed, right? Like they can regurgitate somebody else's definition around it, or they can tie in financial trauma to the sale of their financial product or service. And then you're doing the same thing that I'm talking about undoing, right? So that's where I think it's dangerous, as people learn more about how these psychological triggers, and really, I describe financial trauma as an embodied experience, right? So how these embodied triggers show up and influence not just our behavior around money, but how we carry the trauma and the stress in our bodies. um there's always some bad actor out there who's going to take advantage of people, and that's something that I'm concerned about. I think that there's some people who may do it inadvertently. That's something that I'm concerned about. But I think that the people who get the message, who hear the message, and it's one of the reasons why I'm grateful to be one of the first to market, and talking about financial trauma and defining and redefining and expanding the definition and giving cultural and research based and based or experience based nuance to the conversation is that if I could get to people first, or if I could get to people in a meaningful way, right? So this is the benefit of working with a publisher like Wiley. It's a respected publishers, academic publishers, not, just Rakim decided to write a book in his basement and publish it on Amazon. And that's not, any shade to anybody who self-publishes or any shade to the work that I've done in the past, right? I still think Financially Irresponsible is a phenomenal book.
Yeah, it's great, but
But I also think that having the backing of an academic publisher and being able to distribute these thoughts and frameworks around financial trauma in a way that has not been talked about before will help people to start putting puzzle pieces together and maybe deconstructing where the flaws in financial education exist, because I talk about that, right? Deconstructing where the flaws in workplace culture exist, because I talk about that. Where the flaws in religious and familial culture exists, because I talk about that. Where the flaws in our own behavior exist, and really taking the blame, the shame, and the guilt off of the individual and placing it back in front of the institution, right? And so that is a critique of capitalism as our economic system and an exploitative one, and how the legacy of exploitation that fuels capitalism, coming from a time where Black people in particular were in bondage, still shows up and lives in the DNA of the Black people who are here as descendants of those individuals. And talking about the legacy of some of these institutions and how they have built their wealth, right? So I talk about, JP Morgan's public apology for owning banks that had slaves as assets, listed as assets on their books, and how, the massive wealth of this country was established on the backs of captured Africans that were enslaved. Um, so many things that kind of put these puzzle pieces together and then also project out into the future. Like, what can we do differently? How can we reimagine this? Um, you want to be a capitalist as a black, brown, yellow, green, pink person, cool. But like, this is what you can do with your money to be impactful as a part of society. I talk about this idea of individualism versus collectivism. I talk about why we should, and the illusion. Before I even get to that, the illusion of us having to do it by ourselves, right? Because you have these boys clubs and nepotism and the people choose what is familiar to them, right? And so if the dominant culture is a Eurocentric dominant culture in the workplace, and John Smith shows up and Rahkim Sabree shows up next to him and they have the same qualifications, and the CEO in charge is also, John Smith, he's going to choose John Smith. All right. Like, and so understanding human psychology, the neuroscience, what's happening from a perspective, all of these things, financial therapy. I talk about Reiki. Actually, I interviewed Stephen Hughes. He's the only
yeah,
person that I interviewed for this book. I interviewed Stephen Hughes. He makes an appearance in the book talking about Reiki, talking about somatic healing practices, talking about ancestor veneration. Talk about that in the book as well. All of these things are geared towards helping people to heal. And so, in answering your question, I see, if people do it the right way, I see the potential for healing to exist. I see this as being an interruption in what is the status quo. I see this as being an opportunity for us to reset. I see this as being very revolutionary. But people have to do something with it, right? I did the work. I wrote the book. Other people can build on it if they want to. I'm going to continue to build on it, but then other people can co-opt and exploit it. And I think one of the things that somebody very close to me had cautioned me of as I was writing this book was, he says, Rakim, when you put this book out into the world, it's no longer yours. You need to understand that. When you put this book out into the world, like, people can do with it whatever they want to do with it, and you need to make peace with that. And so that's something that's like, okay, I did the work, like, it's going out into the world. maybe it will inspire the next Rahkim Sabree.
Yeah, so I try to usually take when it comes to that approach, the Buddhist approach when they do the sand sculptures, well, the sand art. And you always hear about it every year. Some little kid got to run up there and mess it up. And all they can do is just sit there instead of turning over tables. They just get right back down there, just fix it. And then at the end of the day, they even just throw it away in the river anyway, once it's all done. And I think that's one of the things that we miss out in society is the understanding of art. Once we're meant to create something and put it out there, how society sees it is the way how they want to see it. Cause it's like a baker, like, they bake the same things over and over again. You're like, "Man, you don't wanna keep, like, your favorite beignet or something like that, like, this is yours, don't wanna touch it." And they even did an experiment with people who are bread makers, and people were making, bread bowls out of them, and the bread makers actually had to sit there and watch their creation being pretty much, in a sense, manhandled because they mutilated just to make a bread bowl. And I think that's a good mindset to have, especially as parents, because the people that are listening are actually part of the same generation. It's like you did your best to provide for your child, and what they take with that information is their experience and their takeaways. Because I know that you even talked about your experience between you and your brother dealing with your father, and it's the exact same moment. It's almost like it keeps showing up in your life, or at least every interview that I came across of yours, that this acceptance of how society views you in your line of work has that actually has that numbed you in a sense, or just kind of provide you a sense of, hey, I'm doing something good here. People are talking about me.
That's a really good question. I wouldn't say numbed. I'm still very sensitive to what people say and how they say it. I think one of the benefits of being consistent is that I get to control the narrative um, quite often, right? As long as I keep showing up and talking about it, like people will go back to 2019, right, and listen to an interview from me. Like, yeah, you'll see growth in what I talk about how comfortable I am, on video, or how comfortable I am on audio. But like I'm telling the same stories, just with greater depth. Um, so yeah, no, not numb, but I know who I am. And I think as I get deeper into this, I'll learn more about who I am. And so, what can anybody really tell me about Rakim, right? I'm saying it, like I'm putting it out there. So
Yeah, I like that. So, with that being said, is there anything that you want to say before we get to the final four questions of the show?
yeah, anybody who's listening, definitely go grab you a copy of Overcoming Financial Trauma. It's available for pre-order now through November 18th. It releases on November 18th. I would love to hit somebody's bestseller list. So pre-orders do matter. But if you want to wait until you get closer to getting the physical copy, then that's okay too. I think it's gonna be a super impactful project. I put a lot of work into it. And yeah, I'm gonna keep hyping it up until the next project and even beyond that.
Awesome. Well, all right. So, you ready for the final four questions?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So these final four questions are just to kind of do a quick deep dive into you about your financial thoughts, really. So, question one, what does wealth mean to you?
Mm. I think the definition of wealth broadly is shifting to include more than just monetary success, especially with this trauma informed perspective on money. I do know that more money does not necessarily equate to greater happiness. It just creates more opportunity for you to do things that maybe make you happy. So, my definition at this moment of wealth is including physical, mental, and spiritual health. Um, in addition to having your basic needs met, and maybe enjoying a luxury here or there.
Like that. Number two, what was your worst money mistake?
Mm. So I've been on this new wave lately, and if you listen to recent interviews of mine, then you probably have heard me say this, but I've been removing the phrase bad financial decisions from my vocabulary because I don't believe that people make bad financial decisions intentionally. I think that people make what they feel like is the best decision for them in that moment. And of course, in hindsight, we could look at any financial decision that we make and say, that was that wasn't so great, right? Or I would do something differently. That said, I don't think that any decision that I've made around money has been a financial mistake. But if we're looking at it from a purely traditionalist's perspective, I'd have to say, leaving my job in 2021 was, the worst financial decision that I've made. But you know, broadly, like going back to that definition of wealth that I just provided you, leaving my job in 2021 was the best decision that I've ever made in my life. So, take that with the grain of salt.
All right. Which brings us to number three then. Is there a book that inspired your journey or changed your perspective?
There are several. Yeah, there are several. I definitely want to shout out Dr. Resma Menakem, who is a New York Times bestselling author of My Grandmother's Hands. He has several other books out there, but he describes himself as um a somatic abolitionist, I believe. And before I started writing Overcoming Financial Trauma and just talking about financial trauma, I had several people in the trauma space or who are trauma aware ask me if I knew who he was and say that our work is kind of similar. So I picked up his book before I started writing Overcoming Financial Trauma, and his focus is on racialized trauma. It talks about it from an embodied perspective. But I think there was one line in My Grandmother's Hands that changed the trajectory of what overcoming financial trauma and the way that I talk about financial trauma looks forever. And that was that trauma is not a psychological event exclusively; it's a body event. When I understood that trauma is physical, it's a bodily reaction and not just something that's in our head, changed the whole paradigm for me in how I view financial trauma, how I discuss financial trauma, how I discuss healing from financial trauma. And so big shout out to Dr. Resma Menakem. Huge fan of his work. I've had the opportunity to talk to him several times in the process. He's actually read Overcoming Financial Trauma already. So
Congrats.
um got his nod of approval, and yeah, big shout out to him.
Nice. Number four. What is your favorite dish to make?
Who stewed chicken is my favorite dish to make. And what's funny about the way that I make stewed chicken, this might be blasphemy to some and maybe not to others. I have had a very multicultural upbringing growing up in New York, of course. And so I love Dominican food and I also love Jamaican food. And Dominicans make stewed chicken one way. And Jamaicans make brown stewed chicken a very different way. When I make stewed chicken, I combine the Dominican and Jamaican approaches to stewed chicken. So my stewed chicken is always brown, but it's good.
Right.
That is like if I want like some serious comfort food,
Right.
I'm gonna make me some stewed chicken, and it's my favorite thing. I mean, I make a lot of things, but that is my go-to.
Nice. Yeah, I'm sure people be like, they ain't you.
People are like, well, they might be in one camp or another camp more than the other, but so really, the thing is, I don't know if Jamaicans use sugar in their browning of the chicken, but Dominicans do. So like they get the big pot, they put the oil gets hot, they put the white sugar in the oil, and then it caramelizes. And then when it caramelizes, you throw the chicken on there and you brown the outside of the chicken with the caramelized oil. And that's when you go in, you start cooking. But like um everything after that is more leaning to the Dominican side, but I use like some of the Jamaican spices and seasonings and stuff like that in my food. So
Hey, look, long as you like it,
I love
they
it,
love it, right?
and I have no complaints. My mom likes it. My sister likes it. It's a fan favorite. So
Nice. All right, so this is the very last question of the show, which is where could people find out more about you?
to Google, right?
You gonna go back to that
I'm
was the first thing I
everywhere, but
said,
yeah.
Google me, baby. Like
But I definitely want to direct people to my website because that is the place that I can control, right? So rahkimsabree.com. I am a speaker, I'm a writer, author, financial therapist. I work with organizations and mostly a train the trainer capacity. I don't do as much one-on-one anymore. Not because I don't love doing that work, but just the capacity is not there. But occasionally I'll do one-on-one work. I love writing. There's so much writing online that you can find between Substack, my column with Forbes. I've written for probably every major publication that there is to write for. But then of course I love speaking, and so there's a host of interviews that I've done on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Pod. Like you type in Rahkim Sabree, some stuff is gonna come up. So anybody who wants to like really do a deep dive on my professional career can find information about me. But I definitely want to point people to my website, rahkimsabree.com.
awesome. And Rakim, thank you so much for coming through on the show. The person that's listening right now, if you got anything out of this and you made it this far, by all means, go ahead on and like, and if you haven't already subscribed, definitely subscribe. Share this with somebody else who's going through some tough times right now, especially with the furlough, or they coming out of the furlough by the time this is coming out, or even just switching jobs and just don't know what to do with themselves financially. This is a great episode to kind of get them to restart. And by all means, please make sure to remember that you only can put on one shoe at a time. Don't hurt yourself trying to put on two. All right, everybody. Y'all be safe. We out. Peace.